Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. This is Max. Today we're going to have some fun. This is actually going to be an informal stream. Today we're talking with an old friend, a former dungeon master of mine, known as Schultz from Schultz Brigade. How you doing, Schultzy?
Oh, I'm doing good this fine evening.
Before I pimp out his channel, let me make sure to ask you to give us a like, you give us a subscribe. Remember, we could use your financial and spiritual support. Check us out and tell your friends and enemies. Anyway, Schultz and I are old friends. He's currently basically associated with two channels that are mostly about gaming and nerd culture, Divine Designs and Drunken Tarrasque. He's doing semi-regular podcasts on all kinds of nerd stuff with his friends.
Oh, yeah.
And how you been, Schultzy?
I've been pretty good. Disappointed about the gaming community for the last few years. Me personally. My joke is I had two things I did not have control over in my life when I was born. Being a nerd and being a Catholic. And both of them I don't regret.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the impetus of some of this conversation started, because I am also a nerd, and I was destined to be a nerd. I was going to be one no matter what. Well, I thought it would. Let me put it this way: it would have either been a nerd or a horrible criminal, or maybe both eventually. Who knows? But
that might explain some of your characters, but
yeah, and so I mean, I was born in the '60s, and so late mid '60s, but still. And when I grew up, nerd culture was something special, and that's because I think actual nerds ran it. I think that's number one, because it was this little cultish subculture.
Oh yeah, so, I think that's essentially what the strength of nerd culture at the beginning was. You literally had to be a fan of it. It wasn't this thing that's in vogue right now where, oh, let anyone come in. It's like the biggest thing for any nerd culture was, can you do it? Then you're a nerd. Like that was the hardest gatekeeping requirement. And it wasn't even that hard. It was just fall in love with it and do it. And I think that's kind of what's been lost today, that it's always talked about inclusivity at all costs. It's like, well, why should I include someone who doesn't like the culture or who wants to radically change it because they don't like something about it? Why don't they embrace the culture, learn about it, and become a part of it and have it grow up with them and change with them, not change it?
Well, it couldn't be done. It really couldn't be done. Because here's the thing, if I were to liken myself to another public figure, I'm most like it would be Kevin Smith, of Jay and Silent Bob. And you know what? And that's a different kind of nerd. But when I was growing up as a nerd, we always had the stoner nerd, the computer nerd, the math whiz nerd, the history nerd, the biology nerd, the atheist nerd, the Catholic nerd, the evangelical fundamentalist nerd, the New Age flake nerd. They would all get together and play over their shit, and sometimes they'd argue about religion or politics, but mostly they didn't. And that changed too. I noticed two things happen in nerd culture. First, you had these horrible hipsters who decided there was money in nerddom, and I think that happened actually mostly because of the tech bubble.
Oh yeah,
originally, the over exuberant and all these nasty people with money and no brains flooded into nerd culture and IT. But I think the other thing that happened to it, straight up, is the ideological atheism, which has has been the most painful part of it for me.
I have to say, I agree. It's one of the things is that I look at atheists in this community, and again, I break them down to like several varieties. Like there's several of them that there's problematics, and there's several of them that are benign. You don't have to worry about them. They're more or less, I think they're called, what was it, Christian atheists or something like that. Like they understand the culture, but they kind of just throw out God. Even though it's weird to me, it's like, okay, it's like you understand culture, religion is an important factor in life, and you should not remove it. And the other part is this, I honestly, when I hear modern people talk about like the toxic nature of communities, it's like, I think you're pointing at the wrong people here. Like, I think you're miscategorizing the group of nerds as toxic, the group of men of toxic, or the group of women are toxic. It's like, no, I think you're ignoring that. It's like, it's coming from a specific subset, and it's just people who live too much in the here and now. And nerd culture, from what I remember, and it was, I'm not that old, but it's still like, when I started out, it was like, you respect the culture, you bring it up. And like within the last 5 years, at least for me, it was like a rush of like destroy, 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 like what came before. And it's always come from these, I call them atheist Bible thumpers.
Oh God, yes, there it is. I'll tell you what. Oh, by the way, we got some commenters. Otherwise, click. Cleric Other says, gaming nerds, yes, we're totally gaming nerds. In fact, we're the Escaping Atheism Project, not me and Schultz here. I mean, the Escaping Atheism Project is considering starting a gaming channel, or at least a regular gaming podcast. I might call it something like God in Gaming. And just come on, because yes, I am an old school nerd, very much so. Played the first edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons when it came out. Thank you very much. Played saw Space Invaders and Donkey Kong both appear in the arcades and the 7-Elevens when it occurred. So, also once got drunk with John Carmack and John Romero.
Oh, that was probably a story to tell.
Yeah, and I was an atheist until I was about 41, 42. But yeah, the thing is that there were always atheists around in nerd culture, and nobody gave a damn at all. They tended to affect an air of being dangerous somehow, but really they were mostly harmless. I know, because I was one of them. When I saw it getting ideological, well, I just wanted to say, when I saw it getting ideological is when it actually started to make me think, wait a minute, there's something odd about this. And and I was still an atheist, and I was ridiculously mobbed a couple of times by atheists for having the wrong opinions. And it was what got me starting to think, okay, these people, maybe I'm not one of these people, and maybe there's kind of something wrong with being an atheist. I didn't even convert to anything. I just said, don't call me an atheist anymore. These people are nuts. I don't want to be near them. I assumed it was a fad that was going to pass within a few years, and I paid it no more attention. I started getting back into nerd culture about 3-4 years ago, a little more than that. Mm-hmm. And I had it took me a long time to figure out that a lot of the jokes were no longer jokes. And a lot of the things that people were saying, they were serious, not kidding, and they were really just that ignorant and hateful. And, I was just aghast. I have been a nerd my whole life. I raised nerd kids, and nerd culture hates them now.
Yeah, well, the thing is that, as you said, like, they're not the right kind of player. And I've noticed many of the people that call that out are essentially the same. They're that whole idea that they want to be the gatekeeper. They don't want to do the trials that come with life to say, I'm the next generation. I'm taking up the mantle. I'm bearing my cross for this new generation to teach and spread what is so good about it. They want to rip it from the rightful generation. And I think this comes from just as what I've seen atheists in every subset of nerd cultures, that they kind of look like a locust to me. The bad ones, the specifically bad ones, and that they're looking for some meaning, and they're not doing the healthy thing of looking for meaning in something bigger like God, but looking for something in a material way of, oh, this gaming system, this gaming culture is bigger than me. Oh my God, and investing so much unhealthy energy into it.
Yeah, I can rule it. A sort of neat, primitive Nietzschean Ubermenschen sort of urge. It doesn't work, by the way, but yeah, that seems to be it. And this is why on the Escaping Atheism stuff, which I don't know if we'll call this one of those videos or not, but in any case, when I do the Escaping Atheism stuff and troll atheists online, I do mean it. You can document it now. It is an organized cult phenomenon. That's why we always, when we mention we differentiate on our project by big A atheists who are always talking about the ones who are indoctrinated in the cult. And it is a cult. No sane atheist should be able to deny that it's a cult movement at this point. They got the talking points, they got the fake history, they got the fake science, they got the fake statistics, they got everything you need for a cult and a little pseudo-political movement, an actual political movement. And it is what it is. If you don't want to be associated with it, get another word, is what I'm starting to say. It's what I did, although I wound up converting. But
here's something I've also noticed with video games in particular, D&D. A lot of the most modern games I've played have become soulless abominations. They are like The Walking Dead. And this is what always bothered me, because when I was playing games, when you find a great game, it tugs at your soul. It's not something just in the here and now. There's something metaphysical to it, and it pulls at your spirit, trying to awaken it. And this is why when you look at these games, you can say objectively this game is good, and you can articulate it, because there's something fundamental about it that, regardless of what it is always going to be good. I think one of the games that I noticed this in was the original Deus Ex, which was, I played it years afterwards. I'm like, oh, everyone's raving about it. It's so old. And the moment I plugged her in and began playing it, it was like, oh my God, it's like gift from God himself, manna from heaven. And I'm like, oh my God, like, you cannot deny the nature of the divine when you actually play some of the actual fundamental great games. I bet you could probably rattle off several dozen of them, but it's like you start noticing something, that these things pull at your soul, understanding what it means to be a human being, the nature of suffering, the nature of life, and they don't hide from it. And when you look at the modern games, they just kind of look at the materialistic mentality of a human being and try to trigger those pleasure centers like an addict. And it's like, no, this is not what you should do. This doesn't create a game worthy of the next generation to show your children or grandchildren this is something great to embrace and love.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to flash the screen of video here. In the comments, Raindrops mentioned that you're going to talk about the Christian influence in early D&D. No, although if you want to learn more about the strong Christian influence on early Dungeons and Dragons, including from Gary Gygax, who I had somehow thought was an atheist but was not. See this interview I did a few weeks ago with Brian Niemeyer. Brian Niemeyer himself's a pretty well-respected science fiction author, and he's done some big historical work on how actually ideological atheists more or less took over the obscure niche genre of science fiction publishing starting in the late 1930s. Explicitly declaring their atheism and their hostility to anything religious or spiritual.
Oh, weren't those socialist nut jobs too?
Well, yeah, and also people like Isaac Asimov and John Campbell. John Campbell? And some of his friends, although John Campbell, I think, got changed somewhat toward the end of his life. But you should probably go look at this interview. I'll try and remember to put it in the low bar, everybody. It's a great conversation about how literally ideological atheists came over and took over science fiction like a plague. And it does matter, because there's some fantastic science fiction that's been written by religious men. Sometimes they include a religious element, sometimes they don't. But when they do, it's fantastic science fiction anyway, quite frequently. And if anybody doubts it, by the way, I would just go read some Jerry Purnell and Larry Niven, two really good, very religious writers, writers from very religious men. Great science fiction. Anyway.
Well, here's the thing with D&D in particular. One thing I've noticed with many atheistic players, they cannot handle religious characters. One of the guys that I played with for a while, and after a while it started annoying the crap out of me, because the guy, he wanted to play a cleric, but he didn't want to follow a god, and he would always be playing an atheistic character and always says, oh, there's no such thing as gods and stuff like that. And it just made me look at this person like, and we're specifically Forgotten Realms where there are gods. You cannot deny the nature of gods. I'm like, why are you intentionally being a dick in this world? Oh, because I don't want to have faith and religion in my character. Like, well, there is something in D&D. It's called the Unbelievers, which all it meant was that you don't believe the gods should be worshipped. which is actually at least allowing for the idea of a quote-unquote atheism, but it ultimately, I love the way they handle it. You were put in the plane of fire in a physical wall, permanently tormented for all ages. And I thought that was a hysterical thing. It's like, yeah, that's where you're going anyway. You're a fucking prick. Here you go. This is what you deserve. Yeah, it's like, to me, it's like I dealt with that same guy, and every single one of his characters, I had played with him for a while, had to always be an atheist. And I'm looking at the guy like, do you understand like how to build a religious character? And he says, fine, I'll prove it to you. And he made the most nuttiest nutball. I'm like, oh my God, you don't even understand how religious people think. It's like, I'm like, it shocked me to my core. It's like, this is how you view religious people? It's like baby eating pedophiles? I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? We're not Weinstein. We're
Right. When I was an atheist, I would have been, when I saw that kind of behavior, and it was just starting when I left. Right. I mean, I had been in what you could call the cult somewhat, because I was a big Penn Jillette fan. You know, I was reading all the right authors, blah, blah, blah. But I did leave right around the time of the explosion with Hitchens and Dawkins and that. And I assumed it would pass in a few years because it was just so...
Fucking hacks! Sorry.
Oh, they are. Every single one of those horsemen. The only one worth a damn at all is Daniel Dennett, and his religious assertions are just nonsense. They're just pure nonsense. The rest are just all hacks. All hacks, especially Dawkins. Most overrated. Not even particularly great as a scientist at all anymore. Really, truly not. But anyway, yeah, no, it's intensely ideological, and it's like a mental disease. It truly is. I mean, when I was an atheist, I would just look at these people that behave like that. I'm like, what is that? I don't want to be that. They're awful, because they are. I mean, even when I was an atheist, I always knew how to respect people's religious views. Why not? I was mature enough to say maybe I'm the wrong one. In any case, you could just look and know both from all kinds of data. It's like it's perfectly normal for people to be religious. So even if you don't believe, well, it's a weird way of looking at the world that works for them. Leave them alone, right? That was my attitude, and that attitude is gone with these young atheists. It's horrible.
Oh yeah, well, and that's the thing is like I've seen so many of them. Like one guy who just when he played the game, I could tell the evil within him, because as a DM, his whole idea and his whole mentality was not even Old Testament God, which I would have been able to respect, but it was full-blown like Satan himself. I'm here to fuck up your game. And I just sat there like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Because it's like, these games are meant to be played. And this is why, I mean, in specific Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing, it's like, there's a certain limit of like putting tension upon your players. But when you push too much just to revel in chaos and destruction, like, no, you're inviting pure evil as a DM into controls. And as soon as I realized that, it struck me like, actually, that moment when I found that, it was like, oh my God, the initial starting out of Dungeons and Dragons is very Christian, because the first alignments that ever came out were law and chaos. And the word of God is law bringer. He brings order to the world. And it's like, holy crap. And that was that one asshole DM essentially just crystallized in my mind, like how much Christian notions are in Dungeons and Dragons that no one's ever going to realize if they are completely shut off to the metaphysical of looking beyond themselves, beyond this singular generation.
The original Dungeons and Dragons, which is a couple of years before I started, I did start with the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is not the original Dungeons and Dragons. The original Dungeons and Dragons was just Dungeons and Dragons, and there were only 3 alignments: good, neutral, and evil.
No, it was law. It was law, neutral, and chaotic. That was.
Oh no, I think actually it was law and chaos. It was just law, neutral, and chaos. That's right, because it was assumed law was good and chaos was evil, and they kind of made it more complicated after that. I'm not sure. Well, most people.
I think good and evil came out roughly about a year or so after that, give or take.
Right.
But it was, the thing is, like, to me, it's quite telling that that's the first alignment.
Yes, like, and yeah, and it was an implicit part of the game, and it's an implicit part of great stories. Most great stories do feature good and evil, and they can either be cartoonish and simple ideas of good and evil, or very deep, subtle, and complex meditations on what is good and what is evil.
Oh, yeah. I did that in my games of that. I think that's what shook a lot of my players to my core, because I was a rookie. Because I'm like, okay, I'm going to play this. I'm going to do this. And the moment I did this, I built characters that many of these people were just crying over. You know one of my characters, Rin, the drow that was raised by dwarves.
Right.
And it's like, I made him, like, I literally chose a god that was essentially Catholic. And they're like, oh, okay, he's going to do this bombastic religious guy. And it's like, he's suffering, making sure the party survives. And they're at the end of it, like, he loses everything in his life. And they're all crying. And, like, these stone cold hearted evil atheists are starting to cry. Like, I don't know why I'm feeling so sad. And, like, because you're having a religious transcendental experience, just embrace it. And it was like, they're like, well, why? I'm like, let's be honest. This is the suffering of Christ, or Christ-like figure. I'm not being subtle here, guys. I'm being rather on the nose with this. And I'm like, and a lot of them they're getting into it. They fell in love with the characters. Then I started building more to them. And it's like you need those points. And atheistic DMs, I've noticed, always go for bombastic. They don't allow for the subtle, quiet moments.
That's right, because once you don't have any belief in the transcendent, once you're an atheist, good and evil means very little to you, and you usually embrace a radical subjectivity. And it usually leads to a sort of narcissism and a sort of desire to just, like I said, be the one ultimate one in control of everything. Mm-hmm. And that never works out, man. In real life, even if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out in the end. You wind up miserable no matter what.
Oh yeah, I've seen so many of those games that just implode. I'm just laughing. It's like you try to control people and tighten a leash about them. Like, God does not want you to do that. Love thy neighbor for a reason. Love your players. Understand they're going to do some crazy shit that you're going to scream at, but you got to let it happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that lack of good and evil, I think, affects gaming today.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things we both agree on, for example, but I'm going to make you change your mind about something in a few minutes here. We both agree that Fallout 4, I won't say it sucked.
The base game was not the best. I'll say that.
Yeah, Fallout 4 has got to be it was a heartbreaker is what it was, because it was just good enough for people to enjoy. Here, I'll just flash some video in case nobody's ever seen it. If you've ever seen it, it's a great game. But the story component was so much stronger in the previous 4 editions, and they watered down and simplified the story. And they made other choices we could argue or disagree or argue about. Like, I also happen to agree it was a mistake to voice the protagonist. It was a terrible mistake to do that. And they should have invested in better writing. The biggest flaw is the core story. And I think that is also because in Fallout 4, they took out the karma system. Now, Christians aren't the type who believe in something like karma. In fact, they would consider it kind of heretical in a way. Although, I don't know, the nature of sin and the fallouts from sin is pretty similar. But anyway, karma is close enough that it still gives you an idea. It still gives you a moral compass throughout the game as to what's good and what's evil. That was very true in both Fallout 3 and New Vegas. And I know that it added to the game, because even if you decided to be evil, you knew you were being bad. You weren't pondering a moral. I mean, you did have moral quandaries in the game that were horrible.
But they didn't have the same impact, because, like, if you look at New Vegas or Fallout 3, like, when you did something evil, it's like, it wasn't just, oh, ha, evil mustache twirling, but are you going to screw this person over for your own needs to survive? Like, that's a hard question to ask if you're actually playing serious role-playing games.
Oh, yeah, because once you throw out moral questions, it really does, and embrace radical subjectivity even in the characters. It becomes harder to write a compelling story. And they tend to go toward more extremes in brutality, more extreme in sex, more extreme in noise or music or whatever it is, just something more extreme to push them.
Well, they latched to the materialistic nature because that's all they got left.
Exactly. And materialist, by the way, isn't just economic. It's a whole view of the universe. We're nothing but meat sacks wandering around, products of our and controlled by our selfish genes and all that other pseudoscience gibberish the atheists believe. It is pseudoscience, by the way. Selfish gene and such. It really is. But it really, it's harder to get stories that tug at your heart. And you can tell these are the kind of, that kind of influence was even there. One of the things you were mentioning how atheists invade a community like locusts. Mm-hmm. They do. They're usually members of the social justice left. And that's been going on for quite a few years now. If you look at the new atheism, it both its methods and its phony narrative and its phony statistics and its phony history and its phony science is very much like other social justice so-called science. It's all manufactured garbage. Most of the new atheists came out of the left, then they got old and in the way and got rid of, and new blood was brought in. But it's a mostly leftist movement with some libertarians, some very dumb libertarians going along with them because they're atheists for personal reasons and less ideological reasons. But even just hanging out with these ideological atheists infects their thinking. And they come in, and the way it happens is they just start complaining that they're uncomfortable around religion. And they started doing that more than 10 years ago in corporations and stuff. Well, we don't want to offend anybody. We won't put anything religious up, which is, just been a growing trend. Notice the implicit assumption that religion is offensive in and of itself, just by existing. They don't want to see it in the workplace because you can start to see the atheism itself is just part of that same old grievance industry identity politics narrative. And you see it, they're trying to avoid offending anybody, so they have no religion in Fallout anymore. Mm-hmm. It's not true. And first off, just having a karma system puts you in the realm of the spiritual, which those old games had. And second, they had explicitly religious stories in there, especially in New Vegas. They had a really deep one.
The Burn Man, my favorite one.
Burn Man was very religious, and it was very well done as a religious story.
It was the only time I've ever seen Christianity or a monotheistic religion
and weren't they actually Mormons?
Yep, they were Mormons. They took the Mormon mentality, and I can tell you why. The Obsidian Entertainment has a lot of people who wrote some of the original Fallout games. They're the ones who did that. They're known for exceptional writers, and they know their shits. And it's like that's why that game was so beautiful, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I'm just sad that there wasn't a sequel to it, because the people who knew how to do it, they even said, I think the guy who initially created it says, we take a philosophy, we take an idea, and we put it in a new environment and see how it would grow, regardless of how we feel. I'm like, this is something important. And they says, and we'll take faith, religion, all the aspects of human life. They don't cut out a part because they don't like it. They will make sure if there's a part they don't like, they have to focus on it. This is something really important. And I mean, at least with New Vegas, you had what would happen if the apocalypse fell, technology lost, and you still had religious people out there. Well, there'd be rebuilding of communities. People would come together. Religion is a centralizing and solid foundation for a community. It actually builds something to force you to look to the future, to future generations. So you would be thinking, okay, how can I make sure my children are better? If you're a pure atheist, you have to look in the here and now, and you don't usually think about the next generation.
In fact, if I were to get into it, I think a flawed, oh, by the way, in the comments, Flawed Intellect mentioned that Fallout 1 and 2 had karma. Yeah, sorry. All respect to Fallout 1 and 2. I did start with Fallout 3, but I love the lore, and one of these days I'm going to go back and play Fallout 1 and 2.
You will not be disappointed.
When you take the metaphysical out, which they mostly did in Fallout, I mean, there's much less of that drama. In fact, it infects the core story. The core story, I think, is rooted in godlessness in multiple ways. Mm-hmm. I mean, what most people will see obvious, the most obvious thing is you get this core story But the adventures are all wooden. You just go and save somebody and do an errand and come back and get your reward. And you're otherwise supposed to be going to rescue your son. You start with this wonderful setup.
Oh, that was the most beautiful start I've ever seen in a game. It was quick, to the point, but already showed you are a loving father. Well, if you choose the male, but you're a loving father who's going to look for his son. And it was like, for me, I'm like, wow, like, oh my God, like, I don't have a son, but I know that feeling of wanting to protect your young. Like, that's a transcendent feeling.
And then you horrifyingly see your wife killed and your child kidnapped, and you come out, and then the whole mechanic is designed is that you're theoretically going to find your son, except there's no impetus for you to get about that business anytime soon. Your wife's dead, your kids you've been kidnapped by the murderers, and you're going to run around fighting super mutants and rescuing settlers and setting up towns and exploring dungeons and strange buildings and gathering loot and building things, and maybe eventually you'll get around to looking for your kid. And when you finally do find him, the story is lame. Yeah. And you feel no connection with your son when you meet him. None. That's rooted in two social phenomena that I think go together, actually. But there was no, like the writers didn't even understand what fatherhood is, or were intentionally trying to deconstruct it or something, because it was just terrible. The whole father-son relationship was awful.
Oh God, yeah. Here's the thing. Spoiler alerts. This is a few-year-old game, but suck it, guys. This is important to talk about. It's like your son is now, what was it, 60 or 70 years old when you meet him.
Right, but they could. Well written, it could have still carried off, but it wasn't well written.
Oh yeah, both of them were wooden. Oh, I miss you, father. It's like, you were never raised by this man. Like, you probably wouldn't have that same feeling. Like there's nothing to connect you to him. You've been separated. Like.
You know what? We got a whole generation of young people now who've grown up without their fathers, and it shows in their character, and it shows in the entertainment. And they're not better off for it. And so Fallout 4 has one ridiculous little bow, a very tiny little bow to religion in
those in the wasteland area, the irradiated.
No. In Diamond City, there's this little. It's clear they were going to do something religious and took it out in Fallout 4, because if you get deep into the game, I have. I
beat it, but the problem is it was so uninspired. I don't probably remember it.
Well, there was one in one city. There's one very small building that's a church of anything for anybody who believes anything, and that's all there is. And otherwise, I mean, it's done kind of positively, but nothing really. And otherwise, you have nothing but bombed out churches that no one goes to anymore, and the children of Adam, who were basically a crazed, nutty, psycho, dangerous death cult.
Yeah,
and that's all they've got for religion. And again, that starts to show after a while. I mean, every game doesn't have to have religion in it, but in a world like that, it's unrealistic not to have it.
Oh yeah, and not to have it even not to even have it in a positive manner. Like, fine, you can do negative, but if you do negative, you got to do the duality. You got to show the positive. Nothing is always purely evil. Like, there is some other flip side to it. Like, you got to understand, like, religion could be manipulated by some psychopaths like the children of Adam, but you know that there'll be people that are going to try to do good, like the followers of the apocalypse that was in the other games. Hint, hint, guys, use this real shit, idiots.
Yeah, and by the way, you can manipulate the crap out of atheists. They all think they can't be manipulated, but that's the fool who thinks he can't be manipulated is the most manipulatable. And it's easy to manipulate atheists. You just convince them that something is science and or in their best interests or what they already think, and they believe it every time. As long as it fits what they want to believe at the moment, and you call it science, they'll believe it. Why they're so easy to manipulate.
You wanted to prove to me you changed my mind about Fallout 4. I want to see this.
I will change your mind about Fallout 4, because before the show here, Schultz told me that he had uninstalled Fallout 4. He was so disappointed in it and so blah'd by it. I had slogged through and stopped for a while, but then I waited for the DLCs to come out, and then and I still wasn't that. And the mods improved it. I'm sorry, not the DLCs improved it somewhat, but I really still was disappointed. But then I discovered the modding community, and I've seen what has happened with the modding community. So the stories suck in Fallout 4 because there's no right and wrong, there's no good and evil, and no, it doesn't have to be about religion. Oh, actually, I wanted to mention one of the other things is there are characters. You find some characters wearing clothing, like when you take it or remove it from their bodies or whatever, it says pastor suit or pastor outfit. In other words, they're supposed to be religious. Something religious was going to be in the game, and it wound up taken out. Which I got to wonder about. Because like I said, they also had that Church of Believers, but nothing else, and it didn't go anywhere. It felt like it was going to go somewhere, but it just didn't. So I theorized it was taken out. But anyway, the problem is, first off, Bethesda, for all the complaints about it, has pointed out simply that Fallout 4 is the best-selling and most profitable game they've ever put out, which I mean, they haven't said it like this, but kind of reduces their incentive to give that much of a damn about those of us who complained about story. But still, at the same time, everybody agrees the core story wasn't that good. The problem is the tools they have put in the game and the tools they have made available to the modding community make it like the coolest damn thing ever. I mean, they've recently pissed off the modding community. I'm not going to talk too much about that.
I know what you're talking about.
I think they're going to resolve that, because what they've managed to do with modding is just too freaking good. I mean, we don't have time to look over it, but there are people doing amazing things with mods. Because they're developing. Well, for example, Nora Lives, one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. They literally, modders rewrote the frickin' core story so that you find your wife, Nora. She's fully voiced, she's fully articulated, she's a companion. And rewrote the whole story so there's lines and stuff for her to do and ways for her to act, and fully voiced both of them and made it fit into the game. It immediately improves the story, by the way, because all of a sudden your behavior makes a little more sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah, that would do that. That one, guys, one little change makes a huge difference. Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, the modders were able to just do that. And most of it was original. There's people developing entire towns, entire settlements, entire adventures. There's a project now in the modding community to remake Fallout 3 in Fallout 4, in the Fallout 4 engine. You can go look and see they've got regular updates. There's also a Fallout New Vegas in Fallout 4. People are building that too. There's wild and wacky weapons. People build their own characters. You can build your own voiced characters to be companions, voiced or unvoiced. But I mean, a lot of people are going all out. And it becomes, and they've added, I mean, one of the best mods ever that completely changes the game. Now I'm spazzing out, I know, guys. But it's called Settlements. Okay, because the settlement mechanism in Fallout 4 was there, but it wasn't. And there's some people who've done some good things with it, but it wasn't well fleshed out. One of the most amazing is this modder called Sim Settlements. Do you remember the old Sim City game?
Yep.
Yeah, basically it's Sim City more or less inside of Fallout. Literally, you're still in the same towns and doing all the same things, but you could just sit down and lay out plots and say, I want agriculture plots here, I want residential plot here, I want industrial plot here, military plot here, recreational plot here. And the settlers all go and start building it. And you add more things and they start scrapping stuff on their own. They have ways of arming themselves.
Oh, you mean like act like a real living, breathing place, not like a robotic soulless.
And you set up trade routes between them, and you manage things like how much, do they need water? Do they need food? Do they need recreation? Do they need this, that, or the other thing. They need defense. Then the modding community goes even further, and it's like, and they've added tools. Some of these are from Bethesda that the modding community's used, but they've added arena combat capabilities. One of my favorites.
So they did Bethesda's work for them. I gotcha.
Well, it's turned Fallout into an erector set / model train kit / Minecraft / role-playing / arena fight sandbox. You can do damn near anything in. Write your own adventures. I mean, and people are out there doing things like, oh, here, come download. Here's a level 75 character you can download with these characteristics, and you can use it to play this adventure. It's really quite amazing. Bethesda is fools if they don't find some way. If they don't find some way to patch it up. But I mean, you can do things like, there's a mod, Godzilla attacks the castle.
Oh God!
And literally, Godzilla does attack, and you decide to fight it up. So of course, you've got to spend a lot of time setting up and defending a location from him. But it's all in game, using all the game physics and everything. People are building floating player houses, look like blimps. It's so cool what they're doing with it. It's like the core gaming system you want to have, just because you can do so much with it, either in game or out. One of my favorites, by the way, if you're a Fallout geek, or even if you're not, check out Disco Gnome. The guy's just funny. And plus, if you watch Disco Gnome, my wife likes watching Disco Gnome, and she doesn't play any video games. Well, like Candy Crush.
Note to myself, Disco Gnome.
Disco Gnome, Fallout 4 stuff, he does. I love his Marcy fight series. Marcy's one of the characters in the early games, and everybody hates her, so he puts her in arena fights with people just so he can touch her. But I mean, people set up stuff where they can even, I saw one guy, he set up a tower filled with laser and machine, auto laser, auto machine, auto missile guns, about 8 stories high, and then programmed it to have 100 super mutants attack it, have 100 Autobot. I mean, it's crazy what they're doing with it, and it's super uber nerdy. So
I played around with the mod community with New Vegas, but I was just, maybe my biggest frustration with Fallout 4 was that dismal thing. It's like I'm glad you pointed out the mods, because now I'll probably reinstall it after we're done.
Go at least subscribe to Disco Gnome. He's from Boston, or he's from somewhere in New England, so he's got an appropriate accent, and he's really funny. He tries out mods and talks about things, and he's really funny while he's doing it. I'm pretty sure he's from Boston, and he's just, you'll be stunned at what you see people are doing with these mods. I mean, some of them are ludicrous, of course. There's one where, like, I can't remember what this modded weapon is called, but it's a pipe wrench, and you hit somebody with it once, and a car falls on their head and it explodes.
Okay, that sounds fucking epic.
Right. Oh yeah, it's epic for 10 minutes, right? And then of course it's just stupid. And those are the dumb ones, but then they got the great ones. Like I said, they've got mods of adventures that people have written with 5-6 hours of playtime, voice characters and everything. So yeah, but to get back to the more, so all of that makes up for the fact that the core story is soulless. The core story is metaphysically soulless. It's spiritually soulless, and actually being that way is what took a lot of the life out of it.
Oh yeah, and actually that was one of the other things I've noticed. My dislike of the Dungeons & Dragons gaming community. It's that same soullessness, because one of the things what I do is I look to the past, be it actual game modules or actual real life history, and I've noticed a lot of the bad DMs, they don't have this desire to learn from the past. And one of the things that I have done, rereading, and I got it right in front of me, the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And because what bothered me was I dealt with so many people who try to make tieflings, which these are these demon devil-like characters, and they never make them interesting. And I'm like, okay, yeah, okay, good. You got horns.
Well, because you're evil. Because honestly, if you're an atheist, you barely recognize evil. You think, and sometimes you even think of yourself as evil and think it's cool to talk that way. But I mean, really, if you embrace radical subjectivity and believe there's ultimately no good and evil, and then characters become very flat very quickly.
Oh yeah, well that's the thing is with reading C.S. Lewis. I suggest people read the Screwtape letters if you ever want to role play evil manipulating characters. They're not these bombastic things. They are a slow, insidious, corrupting influence, and it's something really beautiful because I put this in my game. I had a tiefling, and when they found out he was the evil guy, you wouldn't believe the level of, oh my dear God, I've never heard so many prayers from so many supposed atheists when that reveal happened.
Listen, we've been going a little too long, so I'm going to start wrapping this up here. But Schultz and I are talking about maybe possibly doing more talk about gaming and God. And even if Schultz doesn't want to do it, I'm pretty sure John Baptiste and Andrew Strutelites want to do it too. So we'll probably have, and I'll also mention we're looking at starting an Escaping Atheism D&D group, which we will probably stream on Twitch.
Oh God, that's going to be awesome.
Stay tuned for that. That might be another month or so, but that might actually happen. Watch some D&D nerds who are Christians of various denominations, not the same denominations, and yeah. So everybody, just to remind you again, hey, check out Disco Gnome just because he's funny. Even if you don't play Fallout, just go watch Disco Gnome. You'll want to play Fallout. And also, again, check out Schultz on Drunken Tarrasque and Divine Designs. And please remember, give us a like, give us a subscribe. In a few minutes, by the way, I'll try and tweet the link out. I'm going to be on a stream with a young atheist and his friend. He goes by Gonna Go For It. I'll tweet the announcement out. Anyway, give us a like, give us a subscribe, tell your friends and enemies, ask Schultz to come back sometime, and God bless everybody.
God bless everyone.